Welcome to the podcast Ukrainian Studies at the University of Illinois. My name is Olga Khometa. I'm an assistant professor in Soviet and post-Soviet studies with a focus on Ukraine in the Department of Slavic Languages and Literatures at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And I would like to introduce our guest today, Taras Ferencevych, an executive director of the Ukrainian Studies Fund.
Yes.
Welcome, Taras.
Thanks, Olga. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you for coming to our campus and for a very generous gift that you support our program with. And I will just add a note that we are preparing for a big event in Chicago to promote Ukrainian studies at UIUC. And thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'm excited to be there. I think it's important to just make sure that the generosity is of the community, right? We just sort of aggregate their generosity and then allocate it where it can be most useful, right? And so, this isn't the Ukrainian Studies Fund manufacturing money. This is folks who believe in Ukrainian studies at the University of Illinois who generously donated. We've been able to aggregate that to make the gift to support the program here and hopefully build a foundation in which a bigger and more robust program can be built.
So let's speak about the Ukrainian Studies Fund. Okay. And what I know is that it's an educational charitable institution with a unique historical record of accomplishments. And so what are these accomplishments? What is the history of Ukrainian Studies Fund? And finally, what is your role as an executive director?
Sure. So the Ukrainian Studies Fund has a fascinating history. It came out of the initiative of students in the late 1950s at a meeting of the Ukrainian sort of Students Association, which was happening at Columbia University. These were folks who came over after World War II as young people and started to attend American universities and quickly realized that the sort of narrative that was prevailing at American universities was counter to what they understood to be the narrative of certainly the history of the sort of that part of the world where they were from, so Ukraine. And so they decided to do something about it, as young people are often sort of motivated to do. But they needed a champion, right? They needed somebody to sort of help them and guide them. And, through all sorts of situations, they landed on a gentleman called Omelan Pritsak, who was a professor of Turkic studies, if I'm not mistaken, at Harvard University. He was a Ukrainian by heritage, and he had a vision, right, for what this might look like. And he articulated that vision to these young people, these students. Stefan Chemich, sort of the leader among them, of this, endowed chairs in Ukrainian studies, history, literature, language, or philology, and then subsequently a whole research institute. And as Ukrainians, tend to do, they organized and they started to fundraise. And at the time, the price of an endowed chair at Harvard University was $600,000. It is no longer the case, but Harvard sort of went along. They agreed to allow for the Ukrainian Studies Fund to raise money. They gave them 5 years to do it, and then they would consider creating these endowed chairs. And sort of long story short, right, through this sort of power of aggregation of all these small donations in many of the diaspora communities all over the United States. The project was a success, right? Somebody dubbed it the sort of Harvard miracle, where, successfully raising the funds for, at the time, one original fund, but then the Harvard Corporation decided to divide it into 3 endowed chairs, the Hrushevsky Chair in History, the Cheshevsky Chair in Literature, and the Potebnya Chair in Ukrainian Philology. And then after that, fundraising began for the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. So I think even today, right, the Ukrainian Studies Fund, or USF, is best known for for the Harvard miracle, right? For the Harvard project. Certainly, even until recently, people were congratulating me on my job at Harvard, just because the affiliation has been so strong for so long. But the Ukrainian Studies Fund is sort of much more than just Harvard. Certainly, that's the sort of jewel in our crown, right? The crown jewel. But we have, since the early 2000s, been working with Columbia University, at the Harriman Institute, which is a wonderful partner, with a little bit different model where there's more support for graduate students and a visiting professorship, and then a number of other programs, publications, all across the United States, and partnerships with programs in Canada and Ukraine. So, yeah, a long history.
Yes. Yes, a long and very successful. So now you are here.
Yeah.
So you're interested now in building the Ukrainian Studies Program here at UIUC. Tell us more. What you are looking for to build, and what's your ultimate goal?
Yeah. So, if I had to sort of say exactly what I'm looking to build, I would be more broadly Ukrainian Studies programs at American universities. What's intriguing about the University of Illinois is the pieces that are already in place. The history here of Ukrainian studies, right? Professor Staurin, who was here for a long time, and I think people, certainly locally in the Chicago community, but even beyond, sort of recognize that name and recognize the legacy that he left here, most notably in the library collection, right? This massive library collection of Ukrainian literature and periodicals. And then, it seems like the university more recently has sort of on its own realized the importance of including specifically kind of Ukrainian studies within its scope of research and scholarship around Eastern Europe and Eurasia, by creating positions for people like you, right? So there are already building blocks here, and there are partnerships with Kiev Mohila, and there are sort of displaced scholars from Ukraine have been supported by the University of Illinois. So there seems to be a commitment here to Ukraine and Ukrainian studies, right? So it's not starting from scratch, right? So in the 1950s and 60s, if you wanted Ukrainian studies, you had to raise money to create it from scratch, right? Whereas the paradigm, unfortunately, because of this brutal war, has shifted a little bit, where universities are kind of realizing that, maybe we should pay a little bit more attention to Ukraine. And so, more and more there are kind of these little pockets and building blocks that can then, hopefully flourish into more established programs with all the relevant pieces, right? And I think, it's not a matter of replicating Harvard, right? It's a matter of creating a program that makes sense for the University of Illinois, right? So, and it seems to me there's a much bigger commitment to kind of interdisciplinary work here, which me personally, right, I feel like is really important, because understanding Ukraine takes a lot more than just understanding its literature or just understanding its history. It's certainly in the current context. There needs to be an interdisciplinary lens applied to fully understand all the nuance of a modern Ukraine and, the current kind of situation there.
And I would like to add to this that our law school is currently having this mentorship program with Kiev Mohila students. And indeed, it's important to bring experts on Ukraine to political science sphere and art history and
engineering. The idea of sort of reconstruction, or even sort of certainly the defense, right? Modern warfare. So much, right? There's so much there. Tens and tens of sort of dissertations worth of material, books worth of material. And so, yeah, and I think creating a paradigm which looks at Ukraine from a multidisciplinary lens, as opposed to just through very sort of like siloed kind of disciplinary lenses, could be the thing that distinguishes the University of Illinois from other Ukrainian studies programs.
Awesome. This is inspiring. I would like to add to this that here we have a minor and major in Ukrainian studies in the Slavic department. People can major in Ukrainian through our area studies center RIS. We offer many courses that are either exclusively on Ukraine or incorporate Ukraine as a major part of this content courses, such as exilic and diasporic literature, war and resistance in contemporary Europe. These are courses that I teach, or Soviet literature that you attended today.
I did, yeah.
What are the projects that you are most excited about at the moment? Something that inspires you, and you expect a big groundbreaking outcomes of it.
So I was just talking to Sam about this. I grew up the son of Ukrainian immigrants born here, which brought with it all sorts of perhaps blinders to Ukraine in a much different context than in which I was sort of raised, right? And I think what I'm realizing, certainly now that I'm involved in the Ukrainian Studies Fund, is that there's this whole world of Ukrainians and Ukrainian studies beyond that pretty narrow kind of world that I grew up in, that is fascinating and incredible. And what I think is most exciting to me is sort of finding folks like you, like Daria Cymbaluk, like an Alex Auerbach, right, who didn't come through kind of the what I sort of was raised to understand was sort of the pathway, right? Born and started their scholarly work in Ukraine, came here, of their own kind of ability, established themselves as scholars, and have gotten positions at universities, not because those positions were created by some charitable organization, but because of your work and your scholarship. And so it seems like our mission now is to assure your success, right? As to make sure that you have what you need to succeed and to grow and to expand the field, because you've already done all the hard work. Certainly, and now it's let's make sure that these folks have what they need to succeed where they've gotten to through all of their own hard work, right? And so it changes it changes the paradigm. It changes, from having to build huge endowments to really being able to do these targeted infusions of, philanthropic gifts that, secure positions that are already existing, right? Encouraging universities to create these positions without having to raise millions of dollars for them to exist, right? Or provide them with advice or our experience as to sort of how it's worked, things we've learned from our experience. Certainly we have made lots of mistakes, but we've tried to learn from them, right? And as we go forward, try not to repeat them. And so I think that's what I'm most excited about is discovering, right, more folks like you, right, at universities who are, these sort of bright and sort of Ukrainian aware scholars who just need a little bit of support in order to thrive, and then linking all those people together, right? Sort of like, or helping them. There are other organizations that are creating these coalitions, but making sure people have access to those coalitions, and then providing support, just more targeted support as opposed to, so more of a scalpel than an axe.
Well, thank you for recognizing the work and the efforts of the rising scholars. And I really look forward to working with you, Ukrainian Studies Fund, in building the Center of Ukrainian Studies here at the U of I. Harley, I think it's a lifelong project and a passion project for both of us.
Yeah.
And something that the Ukrainian Studies Committee here on campus is working toward. So it's an inspiration for the whole group of faculty here.
Yeah, I've been, in my short kind of tenure interacting with the folks here, very impressed with kind of the vision, right, and the willingness to engage in dialogue, and really sort of like the holistic approach. My limited experience in higher ed, sort of has certainly sort of reinforced, right, some of this sort of narrative about siloed programs and kind of these silos within a university. But it seems like there's more willingness to sort of like cooperate across whether departments or divisions at the university, and thinking in a little bit more I keep going back to the word holistic manner, but because of all the things that are sort of like seed programs already existing here, which sort of happened independent of one another, but recognizing that they're all here, right? There are universities where I think people don't even realize that other things are going on, right? And if they do, they sort of are protective of their kind of thing, where it seems here like folks are more willing to sort of reach out and be like, hey, let's work together, right? Like what I do can help what you do, and then what you do can help what I do. And that, I don't know, I really appreciate that kind of approach to building something, whatever that ultimately becomes. And what's great is nobody's made up their mind yet, right? I know that there are lots of ideas, but there's not there's still, everybody understands there's still the work to be done to figure out what's the best fit for here, right? Replicating Columbia or replicating Harvard, maybe, but I think there's a best fit that you folks are doing the work to figure out what that is.
And it's great to have you in the process of shaping this goal and this center, or like the future of Ukrainian studies in UIUC. So you're participating and building it here now.
Yeah, I hope so.
Which other universities you are working with at the moment, and what other initiatives you support?
Yeah, that's great. So certainly Harvard and Columbia, still are the biggest sort of part of our portfolio. We also work independently with sort of individual scholars, sort of supporting their work. Whether it's help publishing a manuscript or help supporting some research about a topic, and we've always sort of been driven by this idea of identifying sort of lapses or voids in kind of the canon, for lack of a better word, and then trying to find people to fill that. Certainly as a sort of counter to kind of an imperial narrative that is maybe prevalent in higher education, right? So that's always been a big part of what's driven the Ukrainian Studies Fund, is sort of identifying what's missing, and then supporting people who are filling in those blanks. Because, there's it's definitely a sort of David and Goliath story, right? And so, first you need to fill the holes. So identify them, fill them, and then you can sort of, proceed to kind of counter or present an alternative narrative to kind of the prevailing one. So, so we do that kind of thing. Historically, we've done a lot of archival work. We're supported people who do archival work. We don't do it ourselves. Most recently, we've done projects in sort of preservation or digitizing of archives, specifically at UVAN in New York, which has an excellent collection, and in sort of the spirit of preserving and also making accessible, these collections, right? And so one of the things that I'm hoping that we'll be able to expand on is this kind of like digitization and democratization of archives, so that you don't have to travel to the Upper West Side of New York to be able to get access to archival material that's housed at UVAN, or and even just kind of all of these kind of community-based museums, archives that the diaspora has created, going back to kind of the first wave of immigration in the late 19th century, are incredibly rich, but in a lot of cases they're inaccessible, and so it would be incredible to be able to sort of like launch some sort of a bigger initiative to digitize and preserve these archives to make them more accessible, and just to really sort of celebrate, right, all the accomplishments of Ukrainians here and back in Ukraine, because a lot of this material is material that made it over after the subsequent world wars in the 20th century, because the people who were sort of like the subjects of this archival material were some of which were able to leave, were able to sort of preserve this, and then obviously create a lot of new material once they got here.
Yes, diaspora played a major role in preserving Ukrainian culture through archives and after Soviet occupation of Ukraine. So you preserved Ukraine here. And I'm aware that the digital project that you're doing here in America also extends into Ukraine. So maybe you can tell us more about this project and how exactly it was a response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, so I think it sort of predates Russia's invasion. Well, this Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think, and credit goes to my predecessor and the folks who were in the leadership of the Ukrainian Studies Fund, having this flexibility to be able to act when needed. And so most notably, at the end of the Soviet Union, this realization by folks at the Ukrainian Studies Fund that a lot of archival material that is housed in sort of state institutions are in jeopardy because there's no longer a state, certainly no longer funding from a state apparatus. And so, in the early 1990s, very basic things like acid-free paper, acid-free boxes, these things that in the West we take for granted, one, because they're easily available, and two, just because, they're sort of standard practice in archival work, which just wasn't the case, right, in sort of early post-Soviet period in Ukraine. And so Ukrainian Studies Fund, as best as they could, tried to fill that need by providing these very kind of basic material needs to various sort of archival institutions or cultural institutions in Ukraine, including a printing press, so that not only could academic work continue to happen, but also could continue to be published. And so, this giant two-color printing machine was brought into Ukraine in the early 1990s, along with the paper to be able to print things on. Again, just to create a space for scholars to continue to be scholars, right? So they could continue their work and try to keep scholarly work sort of as uninterrupted as possible, in considering sort of the major upheaval. And we continue to do that, right? So we partner with an organization in KU that does sort of digitizing work, and before this war started, there were starting to be funds allocated from kind of state coffers to do this work because they realized it's important. But given the current situation, right, some of that funding has lapsed because other priorities. And so we've tried to fill in wherever possible to so that this work can continue.
Well, and I think you were doing a critical work with digitizing archives in Ukraine now in the context of the war. I go to Ukraine to work in archives like every summer, and I never know if this archive will survive until the next time I'll visit Kyiv. So, well, thank you for doing this work, and it's crucial to preserve Ukraine's cultural heritage, and digitizing is specifically like a very specific and concrete way to do so.
Yeah, and there, luckily, right, there are other organizations much bigger than us that realize the importance of this work. Whether it's UNESCO or some bigger kind of European foundations that have been providing sort of much more substantial funding for kind of regional archives, certainly in the sort of temporarily occupied territories, when possible, things that were rescued, or, areas geographically that are under threat, right, being given priority for digitization. I've heard of cases where there is now material that is gone, but because of digitization efforts, whether they were ours or others, right, are at least, preserved in that way, right? So the originals might have been destroyed or repatriated or expatriated, but there at least is a digital kind of record that they once existed, and so the very sort of basic function of digitizing, is being accomplished, right? Certainly, there's a lot more work involved in archiving things, right? So writing the summaries and then cataloging and making it searchable and all this kind of stuff. But just a very basic kind of, let's make a digital record, right, of this, whatever it is, artifact. And then, when time allows, we can go back and kind of process it. But let's just, at the very least, preserve it virtually.
Who are your most important allies on achieving this mission and supporting you in your projects? And what kind of collaborations you formed or are going to do in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we work with really anybody who's willing to work with us kind of thing. Given kind of our limitations, not only of human resources, but actual sort of capital resources. We always sort of try to leverage, right, and what the sort of limited resources we have into sort of just getting the most out of them that we can. And so, so one of the things that I think I've sort of started to do since becoming executive director is to try to build some sort of coalitions, right? I think that's going to be imperative in kind of the continuing growth of Ukrainian studies, right? There are other organizations that do the same or similar work, right? And it doesn't make sense to me to be working separately, right? If we can support each other, right? Because we all have different kind of strengths. And so I'm starting to reach out to organizations like NTSHA and the American Association of Ukrainian Studies to try to sort of partner, right? So, recently we supported membership for undergraduates and graduate students in the American Association of Ukrainian Studies, right? So we offered to pay annual membership for undergraduate and graduate students to be members of the organization, just to grow the membership, right? To build the coalition, to build the group that's working on this. We are hoping to kind of co-host some sort of event during the AC's conference or convention in November in Chicago, and use that as an opportunity to further kind of highlight the work that's being done here. The more kind of centers of Ukrainian studies, established centers of Ukrainian studies, there are, the better, right? As they say, razom nas bahato, right? This idea, the more together they're sort of like we're stronger and we can sort of accomplish more. And yeah, I think the westward expansion of Ukrainian studies needs to continue. To sort of borrow the manifest destiny metaphor. We have folks in Kansas, we have folks in California, but as we go west, right, I think University of Illinois is going to be an important stop, sort of along the way.
Yes, and it's been that center so far, that hub for expansion of Ukrainian studies westward. So Ukraine also now participates in shaping Ukrainian studies field in the West a great deal.
Yeah.
So recently, on the initiative of the First Lady of Ukraine, there was established a coalition of global Ukrainian studies.
Yeah.
So it's good to see that our efforts here finally are recognized and supported now by the most prominent people in Ukraine, and that together it leads to cooperation and better ways of collaboration between these centers and institutions. So a visionary question. How do you see the future of Ukrainian studies here in the West? And many of your answers already led to answering this question, but maybe you can summarize this vision.
I think so. Sort of piggybacking on what you said about the Global Coalition of Ukrainian Studies, I think, it just goes to show kind of the level of sophistication, right, that the Ukrainian government has sort of achieved, right? They realized that, this is an important tool of kind of soft power in the world, is to support good scholarship on, the topic of Ukraine. And so I think that the vision should be more of that, right? More of this kind of coalition building and sort of mutual support networks to elevate kind of Ukrainian studies beyond sort of individual centers or individual scholars, right? To have formal kind of networks for collaboration, to go beyond kind of this niche understanding of Ukraine and understand, how Ukraine has played a pivotal role in European sort of politics and history, going back to, medieval times. In all the different kind of spheres of scholarship, whether it's science or literature or art, there's still a lot to be explored with this kind of Ukrainian studies lens. And so, creating opportunities for that and for folks who are, and really like creating a space where folks who are doing this work can find each other, right? And it can make the world aware of them, right? So, I don't think anybody likes working, well, maybe not anybody, but most people don't like working in isolation, right? And so if we can create probably not like a physical space, but a virtual space in which people don't feel like they're working in isolation, whether it's even just for moral support, but, whether it's for material support or actual, collaboration on scholarship, I think that would be awesome.
Let's turn the spotlight to you.
Oh.
You shared many important things about the Ukrainian Studies Fund, but I'm also curious about your path to becoming an executive director, and what your responsibilities are now. How do you work? So I assume that coming here is an important part of doing your work. Tell us more about yourself, your story, your inspiration, and your work now.
So I would love to say that this has sort of been a very deliberate plan, a career path, but that wouldn't be true. I think a lot of the things that are most meaningful to me in life are have been influenced by sort of predecessors, right? So people who came before me, and honoring and sort of preserving their legacy, right? This idea of standing on the shoulders of giants. I think I've had incredibly good fortune in the people that I've been able to meet and interact with. This greatest generation that fled Ukraine post World War II, who really were an exceptional group of people, who built a lot of institutions, including the Ukrainian Studies Fund and the Ukrainian, and any number of other institutions in Ukrainian communities. And so sort of honoring that and then building up upon it, right? I feel like is a responsibility that I've decided to sort of take on. That was a big part of my family's story, right? My parents, their siblings, were always very active in the Ukrainian community. Here, several of my father's sisters were, activists even back in Ukraine, and having been arrested by both the Polish and the Soviet authorities. Interactions with any number of sort of oppressive regimes that sort of shaped their sense of purpose around preserving Ukrainian culture, and so that's, I think, what informs my work, is making sure that those legacies are honored appropriately and preserved, right? And because they really are incredibly rich, right, and important. And so, I think because of sort of the legacy of sort of being active in the community, in the Ukrainian community, Ukrainian American community, perhaps, brought to the attention of the Ukrainian Studies Fund, Taras Ferencevych, and, with a thought, towards sort of like succession planning and sort of the next steps of this organization that has been around since the late 1950s. I came up as a potential, candidate for this position. And ultimately after, many months of discussion, I sort of agreed to try it. It's a big responsibility and it's terrifying, right? Because, you think about, letting people down and, just not honoring, all the accomplishment in a meaningful way. Especially in light of kind of like this newest sort of existential threat to Ukraine's existence. So that's a little bit of sort of where, what informs my work. And, I think what's, one of the things that perhaps distinguishes the Ukrainian Studies Fund from some other organizations that maybe you've never heard of because they're no longer around, is that, they took this idea of sort of future proofing, at least for the time being, this organization, right? Where they people who have been around for a long time, made room for new people. They're still around, and certainly I rely on their kind of experience and expertise, almost daily. But they give me a lot of autonomy to sort of shape the future, to bring ideas. And I think that's fairly unique in a lot of these legacy diaspora organizations. And so, hopefully, I am able to, carry the torch and then pass it on to somebody else after me.
Well, thank you for your work. And we're delighted to have you participate in building Ukrainian studies at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Thank you for visiting campus today. I look forward to seeing you more, come up with new exciting projects, and strengthen Ukrainian studies worldwide. Thank you for tuning in. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get informed about our upcoming interviews with brilliant, fascinating scholars, authors, and prominent cultural figures from Ukraine or those who study Ukraine in the future.